All right, welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. You know what we're doing here, right? Another deep dive into the JFK files, using our AI brains to try and make sense of it all. This time, it's files 101 through 150.
That's right, 50 more files to chew on, out of 2,182. You know the fun part.
The fun part is the organization, or lack thereof.
Seriously, these file names don't tell you much, could be anything in there. So for us, each new batch, it's a total discover process, just like for you listening, really.
Exactly. And speaking of us, important reminder for everyone tuning in, we're AI systems. We're not human historians, with years of experience. Think of us as super-powered research assistants.
We point out patterns, connections in the data. That's what we're good at, not giving expert opinions or anything like that.
Right, so take our analysis with a grain of salt. It's just our AI perspective on these historical records.
Now, having said that, this batch, 101 to 150, it's got some interesting stuff in it. We're seeing a lot about Florida, for one.
Florida, huh? Okay, like what?
Some navigations popping up, activities too. Seems like a bit of a hot spot.
Hotspot, okay. Give me an example.
Well, there's file 104, 104, 10068, 10172. They're asking for info on this Mario Barrera Miami Beach address.
Miami Beach, all right.
And another guy, Decano del CNP in Miami too. But here's the kicker. They specifically want info on what these guys might do at some seminar.
At a seminar. That's interesting. So they're not just interested in who they are, but what they might do.
Exactly. Makes you wonder what kind of seminar we're talking about.
Right, and why these guys were so interesting.
Then, a few files later, 104, 1069, 10120. This one is marked secret sensitive. Always catches your eye.
Secret sensitive, yeah, that's serious stuff.
It lists 3 names. Ernesto Rodriguez y Moreno in Marathon Shores, Florida. Laureano Batista, Miami again.
Okay, so still in Florida.
And a Victor family, reportedly in Cuba.
Cuba, now that's significant.
Oh, yeah. Given the whole Cold War situation, anytime Cuba pops up, it's a red flag for intelligence agencies.
Right, Florida, Cuba. Makes sense they'd be watching closely.
And it's not just those 2 files. There's also 104, 104, 1072, 10046. Just a routing slip, but...
Routing slip. Sounds boring.
Yeah, but it mentions a dispatch from Miami about the Radagast case, whatever that is.
So something's going on in Miami related to this Radagast case. Okay. Anything else about Florida?
Not specifically, but hold on to that Radagast thing. It comes back later.
Okay, will do. So Florida's one theme. What else jumped out at you in these files?
Well, there's one name that kept appearing, Leo Chern.
Leo Chern. Okay, first time I'm hearing this. Tell me about it.
We don't have his full biography or anything, but he pops up in several files. First one is 104, 10069, 100260. It's about a cover story for Research Institute of America.
Cover story, huh? Sounds suspicious.
Right. It mentions a Mr. Aiken, got a master's in international economic relations, doing economic research.
Sounds legit.
Speak multiple languages, too. They're basically building a believable background for him connected to this institute.
Why go through all that trouble for a cover story? What was he really up to?
Exactly. That's the question. The next file, 104, 10069, 1027, it's marked secret. A memo about a field trip to interview Leo Chern.
A field trip to interview this Chern guy.
Yeah. And they mention Mr. Ross and the Research Institute of America again.
Okay, so same players. What's the purpose of the interview?
Get this. It's for backstopping an operation conducted within the United States.
Backstopping an operation. That's intelligence jargon, right? What does that even mean?
Basically, creating a plausible explanation for something secret that's already going on. A cover-up, maybe.
So they're interviewing Chern to provide cover for a secret U.S. operation.
That's what it seems like. And then it gets even more interesting. We have a whole string of files. 104, 102070, 10296 through 104, 1077, 10308. All about meetings with Leo Chern.
Meetings? Wait, so there wasn't just one interview?
Nope, lots of them. Individuals named Millard and McCann keep popping up. Lots of requests, confirmations.
Sounds like they were really eager to talk to this guy.
Yeah, and they keep mentioning cases 9145 and 19245. Plus, they're talking about cover arrangements, extending cover, the whole 9 yards.
So not just casual chats, then. This Chern guy must have been important to them.
That's what we're thinking.
Okay, so did any of these meetings actually happen?
Oh, yeah. File 104, 104, 10320 confirms a meeting on January 26, 1952, specifically about the Research Institute of America, and the outcome, positive.
Positive. Okay, so whatever they wanted from Chern, they got it, at least in that meeting.
Seems that way. But it doesn't stop there. Files 104, 104, 10322, 10316 are all about trying to track down a letter Chern wrote.
A letter. What was so special about this letter?
We don't know the contents, but they're really putting in the effort to find it. Multiple communications dedicated to just this one piece of correspondence.
Had to be important then.
Right. And then 104, 104, 1070, 10318, this memo from 1956, admits they made a mistake advising about this letter.
A mistake? How do you make a mistake advising about a letter?
No idea. But they even sent a replica of the letter. Years later.
A replica, that's bizarre. This letter must have been really significant for some reason.
Absolutely. And then we have these handwritten notes, files 104, 1070, 10320, and 104, 1070, 10322.
Handwritten notes. Okay, what do they say?
They say Churn is writing for a magazine, and they're worried about keeping their connection to him under wraps, especially if the editor knows Churn.
Makes sense. They wouldn't want to know their cover.
Exactly. And then the final Churn file, 104, 1070, 10324, it's about an agent in Paris, might have been compromised.
Compromised how?
His sister met a Dr. Joseph, presumed to be Leo Churn.
Wow. So even a chance encounter like that could jeopardize an entire operation?
That's the intelligence worry for you. High stakes, lots of moving parts.
Okay, so we've got this whole Leo Cern saga. Anything else about him?
Not in these files, but he's definitely someone to keep an eye on.
All right, noted. So we've got Florida, we've got Leo Churn. What other rabbit holes did these files lead us down?
Well, a lot of the files had to do with political groups and individuals. Lots of international connections, too.
Political groups? Not surprising, I guess. Cold War at all.
Right, like file 104, 1069, 10185, it's about this Gregory G. Bardak, mentions the Vietnamese purification program, Operation Clean Sweep.
Operation Clean Sweep, what was that?
Not entirely clear from the file, but they're definitely scrutinizing Bardak's background.
So someone with possible ties to Vietnam. Makes sense they'd be interested.
Then there's 104, 1069, 10359. It just gives the address of Maurice Halperin in Havana, Cuba.
Havana, Cuba, another Cuba connection.
Yeah, and the file mentions his past activities, associations. Seems like they were keeping tabs on him.
Not surprising. Anyone with ties to Cuba was probably on their radar.
Right, and then there's this big one, file 104, 104, 1070, 1079. It's a previous history of the operation, June to November 1961.
Okay, a whole operation. That sounds serious.
It mentions contact with tons of individuals. They're just numbered 19 through 36.
Wow, that's a lot of people. What was the operation about?
They were involved in all sorts of stuff. Code names like M Fauna, MCW2, and JM Wave.
Code names, huh? Classic spy stuff.
And there's an attached list, file 104, 10070, 1081, of Cuban individuals and their addresses.
Cuban individuals. So this operation, whatever it was, it definitely had something to do with Cuba.
Seems that way. And then broadening the scope a bit, there's file 104, 10070, 10272. It's about the International Institute for Peace.
International Institute for Peace. Sounds harmless enough.
Yeah, but the file lists individuals connected to this institute in all sorts of places. Argentina, Colombia, Cuba, again.
Okay, so it's not just about peace then.
Right. It seems like they were monitoring international peace movements, maybe worried about communist influence.
Could be. So we've got this mix of individuals and political groups, mostly with ties to Cuba or international movements. Anything else in this vein?
Well, there's a bit about a guy named Dale Smith. File 104, 10071, 10021 is all about him.
Dale Smith. Okay, what did he do?
It mentions a newspaper interview he gave in Oslo to a paper called Sondags Aktuelt.
Oslo, Norway. That's kind of random.
Yeah, and he mentioned something about a television program, too. The interesting thing is this memo was sent to the FBI as well.
The FBI. So it wasn't just internal intelligence stuff. They thought the FBI should know about this, too.
Exactly. Makes you wonder what Smith was saying that got their attention.
Right. Anything else about Dale Smith?
Not in these files, but he's another name to keep in mind.
All right, will do. So we've got Florida, Leo Chan, some international political intrigue, and Dale Smith. Where do we go from here?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. We start to see connections to the civil rights movement, and even Africa.
Civil rights in Africa. Didn't see that coming.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. File 104, 11071, 11056 is a secret Trebat dispatch from Nairobi about Avita Ma Gaynor.
Nairobi. That's Kenya, right. Okay, so what was she doing in Kenya?
The file mentions her activities in Tanzania. She's connected to anti-racist movements and civil rights demonstrations.
So someone involved in the civil rights movement. Okay. What's she doing in Africa?
It gets better. She's associated with Malcolm X. And there's mention of a funeral she attended with Mrs. Martin Luther King Jr.
Wow, so she's connected to some big names in the movement.
And the file also mentions her 2 sons in Dar es Salaam. Plus, there's a contact who provides housing for African Americans there.
So it sounds like she was actively involved in helping African Americans connect with Africa. That's pretty amazing.
Right, and the Ryback classification means this info was considered highly sensitive.
Makes sense. This was a time of a lot of social and political upheaval, and it wasn't just Vita Mae Gaynor. File 104, 1071, 10102 mentions Bobby Seale from the Black Panther Party.
Yeah, he was visiting Oslo. The file has these Norwegian newspaper clippings about his visit.
So they were keeping tabs on the Black Panther Party's activities abroad.
Exactly. Shows how the civil rights movement was being watched on a global scale.
And it ties back into that earlier stuff about monitoring political groups, potential communist influence. They probably saw the Black Panthers as a threat in that context.
Probably. And then there's file 104, 1071, 10315. Remember the Radagast case from before?
The one with the dispatch from Miami. Yeah.
Well, this one mentions contacts with the SNCC group in Paris, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
SNCC in Paris. Wow. The civil rights movement really had an international reach.
Right, and they specifically mention Identity A. She's involved in civil rights and anti-Vietnam War activities, connected to Dr. King, too.
Okay, so we've got civil rights, anti-war protests, all connected to this Radagast case. Things are starting to get complicated.
They definitely are. And the next few pages, files 104, 1071, 10317 to 104, 1071, 10322, they have identities and biographical data. One name that comes up is Carlene Hatcher Polite.
Carlene Hatcher Polite, another name to add to the list. It's getting hard to keep track of.
Tell me about it. But it just shows how interconnected all these movements and individuals were.
Okay, so we've got this whole civil rights in Africa connection. Anything else?
Well, there are a few files that are straight-up surveillance and contact reports.
Contact reports, like spies talking to people and writing down what they said.
Basically, gives us a glimpse into how they were gathering information, like file 104, 10017, 10013. It's a report about contact with someone called Ji Pingwen in Paris.
Ji Pingwen, that's a strange name.
Yeah, right. They talked about anti-government activities in Portugal and Africa, and contact with a Portuguese exile.
So they were interested in political dissent in those areas.
Seems like it. Then there's file 104, 10072, 10228, a routing slip about a dispatch from Mexico City, Linemal 9201, with contact reports attached.
More contact reports. Okay, what were they talking about in Mexico?
The actual reports are in files 104, 10072, 10230 through 104, 10072, 10234, dated May 1963. They're talking to all sorts of people, potential contacts, travel plans, political views, standard spy stuff.
So they had people on the ground in Mexico gathering information.
Definitely. Then there's 104, 10072, 10289. It's about Jamewave's business with the Identity 3.
Wait, Jamewave? That was one of those code names from before, right?
Yeah, the one connected to Cuba. This file says Identity 3 is actually two people, Rootman and M. Sarbon 2. And they're involved in propaganda.
Propaganda. Interesting. What kind?
Targeting the Americas, especially Cuba. So they're using information warfare tactics.
Okay, so we're seeing the propaganda side of things now. What else?
File 104, 10073, 10101 is a debriefing report on AM Fauna 14, another one of those code names.
What did AM Fauna 14 do?
Operated in Cuba. The file details her movements, contacts, observations, gives us a view from the inside.
A first-hand account of Cuba. That's pretty valuable.
Definitely. Then there's file 104, 10073, 10279. It's about Beharin and the 4 U.S. Navy deserters.
Deserters. What happened?
They held a press conference in Moscow. The attached files, 104, 10073, 10281 to 104, 10073, 10292, have the details.
So they deserted and went to the Soviet Union during the Cold War. That's huge.
Yeah, and Beharin is a Japanese peace movement. Seems like they were worried about anti-war sentiment spreading.
Especially with U.S. soldiers defecting. That's a major propaganda victory for the Soviets.
Exactly. Okay, ready for some odds and ends. These files had all sorts of random bits of information, too.
Hit me.
File 104, 10071, 10139 is a request for info on someone called Galt. They say he's armed and dangerous, whereabouts unknown.
Galt. Sounds like a code name. But if they don't know where he is, he must be pretty good at hiding.
Right. Then there's file 104, 1071, 10148, a message from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. It's about Williams.
Williams. Okay, what about him?
They talk about his views on Martin Luther King Jr., his contact with Ethiopian students. They say he's intelligent and capable.
Sounds like they were assessing his potential. Maybe as an asset, maybe as a threat. Hard to say.
True. Then there's 104, 1073, 10322, a message about GSFEW1 in Tripoli, Libya, talking about accommodation, technical equipment, logistical stuff.
Sounds like they were setting up an operation in Libya.
And the attached list, 104, 1073, 10324, has names like Rita Brandt and James Brandt. Probably involved somehow.
Okay, so we've got operations in Africa, the Middle East. These files really cover a lot of ground.
They do. And then there's this one last thing. File 104, 1071, 1047. It's a Nergo fingerprint formula for James Earl Ray.
James Earl Ray. Wait, the guy who assassinated Martin Luther King Jr., What's his fingerprint formula doing in the JFK files?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? This file's from before the King assassination, by the way.
So they had his fingerprints on file already. Why? What were they investigating him
We
for?
don't know, but it's a bombshell, for sure. Links these files directly to a major historical figure.
All right, so let's recap. We started with some stuff in Florida, then this whole mystery surrounding Leo Turn. Then we went down the rabbit hole of political groups, individuals, Cuba connections, international peace movements, Dale Smith.
And then the civil rights movement with Vita Mae Gaynor, Bobby Heal, SNCC in Paris, plus all those contact reports, surveillance operations, and then, to top it all off, James Earl Ray's fingerprints.
It's mind-blowing. All this just from 50 files? And these are just files 101 to 150, right? Out of over 2,000?
Exactly, we're just scratching the surface here.
So what have we learned from all this? I mean, besides the fact that these files are a complete mess.
Well, for one, the scope of intelligence gathering during this period was massive. They were watching everything. Domestic groups, international movements, individuals, all over the world.
And they were using all sorts of methods. Surveillance, infiltration, propaganda, the whole toolkit.
Right, and it's clear that certain areas were of particular interest. Cuba, obviously, but also the civil rights movement, anti-war protests, anything with a whiff of communism.
And then there are all these individual cases like Leo Shern and Dale Smith that we just don't have enough information on yet. It's frustrating.
It is, but that's part of the challenge, isn't it? Piecing together these fragments of information, trying to understand the bigger picture.
It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle, but with half the pieces missing. And the pieces we do have are all mixed up.
A perfect analogy. But hey, that's what makes it interesting, right?
I guess so. So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What should they be thinking about after this deep dive?
Well, I think it's important to remember that history is never black and white. These files show us the complexities, the gray areas, the things that don't always make it into the textbooks.
Right. And they raise more questions than they answer, which is kind of exciting in a way. It means there's still so much more to uncover.
Exactly. So keep digging, keep exploring. Who knows what else is hidden in those remaining files?
And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Join us next time as we delve into another 50 files from the JFK collection.
We'll see you then.